Silence swallowed the diner. Then everything exploded. The first bullet punched through the window behind the booth, and the checkered floor erupted into shards of neon-court glass. Nora Voss did not think. She did not hesitate. She did not know the small boy sitting across from her, dark-haired and 7 years old with terrified eyes that looked like they had seen too much already. She just moved. Her body folded over his like a shield. Like a blade of flesh thrown between him and death. The vinyl booth cushion absorbed the next 2 shots, bullets meant for his skull, now buried in fabric and foam instead. His hands gripped her torn jacket, the fabric so thin she could feel his small fingers trembling against her ribs. "Stay down," she whispered, though her voice shattered like glass, barely audible over the chaos. "Stay down, stay down, stay down." The diner was drowning in gunfire now. Coffee cups shattered on the counter. The neon sign above the kitchen flickered and sparked. Dead leaves from the October wind skittered across the checkered floor, mixing with broken glass that caught the dying light like diamonds scattered across blood. 20 feet away, a man in an expensive black suit stood motionless. Giovanni Calabrese. Even in the chaos, even with his 2 lieutenants, Bruno, broad-shouldered and scarred along his jaw, and Gino, younger, eyes burning with the fury of a man protecting his boss, already returning fire through the shattered window, Giovanni did not move from his position. He watched her. This homeless woman, this nobody with a backpack that held everything she owned in the world, had just taken bullets meant for his nephew. Not with weapons. Not with training. With her own flesh. With her own breath. His dark eyes locked onto her face, and something shifted in his chest. Something cold. Something dangerous. Something that would cost Douglas Hale everything he had spent 8 years building. But what she did not know was this: in 30 minutes, 30 armed men in black would arrive at the place she had slept 3 nights ago, a shelter on 5th Street where she had hidden in a bathroom stall to avoid being noticed. In 30 minutes, her life would detonate completely. The gunfire stopped as suddenly as it had begun. Sirens wailed in the distance, drawing closer, their sound cutting through the October wind like a blade. Giovanni Calabrese straightened his suit jacket. He did not say a word to his men. He did not need to. They moved like they had rehearsed this dance 1,000 times before. The wounded were checked. The exits were secured. And then, with a glance that lasted exactly 3 seconds, he looked at Nora Voss one more time before vanishing through the kitchen and into the darkness beyond. She remained frozen over the boy, her heart hammering against her ribs like it was trying to escape. Now, let us go back to the beginning. Let us go back to $78 and a dying engine on a highway where no one was watching. 3 hours before the shooting, Nora Voss sat in the driver's seat of a 2004 Honda Civic with a check engine light that had been burning for 6 months. She was counting money. Again. $78. She spread the bills across the steering wheel, her hand shaking in the dry October cold. 5 20s. 2 10s. 8 1s. Coins scattered in the cup holder, quarters, dimes, nickels, all of it adding up to nothing. She counted it twice. Then again, because maybe her hands had trembled too badly the first time and she had miscalculated. But no. $78 was the truth, and the truth was suffocating. The parking lot behind the shuttered laundromat stretched empty in every direction. Broken asphalt. Chain-link fence with holes like wounds. The kind of place where nobody came looking, which was exactly why she came here. The kind of place where a woman and her Honda Civic could become invisible. She needed $22,000. Not wanted. Needed. The way a drowning person needs air. Douglas Hale had told her exactly how much on yesterday's voicemail. His voice had been calm, which terrified her more than any scream could have. Calm voices meant planning. Calm voices meant he had decided this time was different. This time he would not let her slip away again. "You have 3 days," he had said. 3 days to put $22,000 in the account I told you about 8 years ago. The one you thought was closed. It is not closed, Nora. I have been waiting. And now I am finished waiting. The phone had gone dead. She had sat in her car for 4 hours after that message, barely breathing, her hands locked on the steering wheel until the sun went down and the stars came out, and she still could not move. 8 years. That is how long she had been running from Douglas Hale. 8 years since the day she had finally worked up the courage to leave him, since she had watched her teenage son pack a backpack and tell her they were never going back. 8 years of sleeping in shelters when she could afford them, in her car when she could not, in bathrooms and bus stations and under bridges when the nights got cold enough that she worried about dying in her sleep. She had never reported him to the police. Why would she? Douglas's cousin worked for Lapt, had been working for them for 15 years, and every time she had thought about filing a report, she remembered what Douglas had told her: "My family owns this city. Your voice does not exist here." The scars on her back were the proof that he had been telling the truth. She pulled her jacket up now, just enough to feel the air on her skin. The marks were still there, still raised like a topography of pain. 8 years had not faded them. 8 years had not smoothed them into invisibility. They mapped every broken promise she had made to herself. Every time she had said this is the last time and then stayed. Every time she had said I am leaving and then woke up in the morning to find him standing over her, his hands curling into fists. The worst scar ran from her left shoulder blade down to her hip. She had gotten that one because she had asked him if he had cheated on her. A question. Just a question. And his answer had been his belt, and his rage, and her blood on the bathroom tiles. She pulled her jacket back down. $78. In 3 days, she would owe $22,000. The mathematics of it was a guillotine hanging over her head, and the blade was dropping closer every hour. Her stomach growled. She had eaten once yesterday, a sandwich from the day-old bin at a grocery store on Maple Street where the manager knew her. He never charged her for the damaged packages. He would just nod, and she would take what she needed, and they both pretended it was a transaction and not charity. She had not eaten today. She started the car. The engine turned over with a grinding sound that suggested it was tired of running, tired of carrying her from one nowhere to another nowhere. But it caught, and the dashboard lights flickered to life, and she pulled out of the parking lot and onto the surface streets of Los Angeles. The city moved around her like she was not there. Cars honked. People rushed on sidewalks. Storefronts glowed with things that cost more than she would earn in a year. She had become very good at moving through the world while being invisible. It was a skill she had developed slowly over 8 years, learning to take up less space, to speak more quietly, to make herself smaller and smaller until she was barely a whisper in the landscape. The highway stretched ahead of her as the sun began to set. Orange light flooded the windshield. She was heading east because there was nowhere else to go, because staying in one place too long meant Douglas might find her, meant the city that belonged to him might close its hand around her throat. It was on the highway that the engine died. Not gradually. Not with warning. The Honda simply stopped running, and Nora coasted onto the shoulder of the road as evening descended into darkness. The wind was picking up. She could feel it pushing at the car, trying to roll it over or blow it into the racing traffic behind her. She sat there in the darkness, hands on the steering wheel, and she did not cry because her tears had dried up somewhere on a Greyhound bus 3 years ago. She did not scream because screaming used energy she could not afford to waste. She just sat, breathing, counting, $78, 3 days, 22,000 owed, 0 options remaining. The wind howled against the windows. A semi-truck roared past, so close the Honda rocked on its suspension. The driver did not slow down. Nobody slowed down. Nobody stopped to check on a woman in a 2004 Honda Civic with a check engine light burning and desperation written across her face. She was nobody. Just a night shift waitress with worn hands and a backpack that contained her entire life. Just a woman who had learned to disappear so completely that the world had forgotten she existed. That was when the black SUV appeared in her mirror. Not 1. 3. They moved in formation, headlights cutting through the darkness, closing the distance between them with the intention of something that had already decided what it wanted. The vehicles were large and expensive and wrong, completely wrong, showing up on a stretch of empty highway at 9:30 in the evening like they had been hunting for her. Her heart stopped. Douglas. It had to be. He had found her. 3 days was a lie. There were no 3 days. There was only now, and the black SUVs, and the sound of their engines growing louder as they approached. She grabbed the photo from her glove compartment. It was the only thing that mattered. A photograph of her late husband, Marcus, taken 15 years ago when they were still young and he was still alive and the world had not yet learned how to destroy them systematically. She pressed it against her heart and whispered a prayer she had not prayed in 8 years. The first SUV pulled alongside her car. The window rolled down. A man's voice, deep and solid like an oath, cut through the wind. "Your car is broken. Get in." She did not move. Now, the voice said. Not cruel. Not threatening. Simply certain in the way that powerful men are certain of things. Nora Voss had nowhere left to run. She had $78 and 3 days and a dead engine and a man in an expensive suit who had just given her an order that sounded like it might be the last decision she would ever get to make. She opened the car door. The October wind tore at her torn jacket like a blade wrapped in ice, and she stepped into the darkness, and she climbed into a black SUV driven by a stranger who would, in exactly 30 minutes, send 30 armed men to the shelter where she had hidden 3 nights ago. She did not know this yet. She only knew that the man in the suit was watching her with eyes that looked like they could see through skin straight into the bone beneath. Like he could read the scars on her back just by looking at her face. Like he knew exactly what it meant to be hunted, to be broken, to be trying so desperately to survive that you would accept a ride from anyone just to keep moving forward. "What is your name?" he asked as the SUV pulled back onto the highway. "Nora," she whispered. "Nora Voss." "I am Giovanni Calabrese," he said, and somehow she understood that she had just crossed a threshold she could not uncross. "The storm will pass and you are far stronger than you think." The engine clicked. Dead. Then clicked again, that hollow sound of a battery giving up, of metal refusing to turn over one more time. Nora Voss sat behind the steering wheel with her foot on the accelerator and her hand shaking so hard she could barely grip the plastic, watching the dashboard lights flicker once and die completely. 11 o'clock at night. October wind tore through the broken window seal of her 2008 Honda Civic, and dead leaves skittered across the cracked asphalt of the empty highway like something being hunted. She turned the key again. The engine made a sound like choking, like gasping for air that wasn't there, and then nothing. Just the wind. Just silence. She had $78 in her wallet. 2 ones, 3 20s, and a handful of crumpled 5s that she had counted and recounted 100 times that day, as if the number might somehow change if she wished hard enough. 3 days. That was all the money had to last. 3 days until she could pick up the paycheck from the diner, assuming Douglas hadn't called in some favor to get her fired, assuming the manager hadn't heard the things he was saying about her, assuming she made it 3 more days alive. The car was useless now. The transmission had been making that grinding noise for weeks, a noise like something breaking inside, like failure coming gradually then all at once. She couldn't afford to fix it. She couldn't afford anything. There was a foreclosure notice sitting on the passenger seat of a car that wasn't even hers anymore, a piece of paper from a bank that already owned her future and was coming to collect her present. $22,000. That was the number that lived in her chest now, a weight that made breathing difficult. $22,000 by the end of the month or she lost the roof over Emma's head, and Emma was 7, and Emma had already lost her father, and Nora was not going to be the mother who took away her home. She sat in the darkness with her hand still on the wheel and listened to the wind. A semi-truck roared past on the highway, its headlights briefly illuminating her face through the windshield, a woman with dark eyes that had forgotten how to shine, with brown hair pulled back so tightly it looked like it hurt, with the kind of exhaustion that lives in the bones. She was 31 years old and looked 50. The years on the run, the years hiding, the years since Marcus died had carved themselves into her face like scars you could see without touching. She could not call anyone. Douglas had made sure of that. Every friend she'd ever tried to reach out to had been warned away, or threatened, or just tired of the drama. Her mother had stopped answering her calls 3 years ago. Her sister had married a man who told her it was unhealthy to enable Nora's situation. Her best friend from college had blocked her number after Douglas showed up at her office and left a dead rat on her desk with a note attached. That was the thing about violence, it didn't just hurt the person it was aimed at. It poisoned everyone nearby, turned them into witnesses too scared to help, too afraid of what might happen next if they stayed in Nora's orbit. So when the car died, there was no one to call. No one to come pick her up. No roadside assistance plan because she couldn't afford the $30 a year. No family. No friends. Just Nora Voss and an empty car on a stretch of highway in Los Angeles where the streetlights had burned out 6 months ago and never been replaced, and the wind that smelled like rain coming, like the sky getting ready to open up and make everything worse. She could walk. The nearest shelter was for miles back the way she'd come, the one on 5th Street where she'd stayed 3 nights last week, where the cot smelled like bleach and old sadness and where the staff knew better than to ask questions about the bruises on her ribs. She could walk there in maybe an hour, maybe 90 minutes if she was slow, if the wind kept pushing her backward. She had walked farther in worse conditions. Or she could stay in the car. Lock the doors. Try to sleep. The engine was dead but the car itself was locked, safe in that way that locked things feel safe even when safety is an illusion. She could stay here until morning and figure out what to do in daylight, when everything seemed slightly less impossible. Except Douglas knew her patterns. He had spent 8 years learning every escape route she tried, every shelter she favored, every highway she took when she was running. He might drive past this exact spot tomorrow. He might already know she was here. She pushed the car to the shoulder of the road, putting distance between herself and the traffic, and then she killed the ignition completely, not that it mattered, the battery was dead, and she sat in the darkness and watched the headlights of passing cars cut through the October night like knives through black cloth. Each one made her heart rate spike. Each one made her hold her breath, waiting to see if it would slow down, if the car would turn around, if this was going to be the night he finally found her. An hour passed. Maybe more. Time felt strange when you were waiting for something terrible. It stretched and compressed simultaneously. She pulled the photo from her backpack, the only thing of real value she owned, and held it up to the faint light coming from the distant highway. Marcus. Her husband. Dead 2 years now, a heart attack in a hospital parking lot, and he had taken with him the only person in her adult life who had ever made her feel safe. In the photo, he was smiling. His arm was around her shoulders. She looked happy, looked young, looked like someone who believed good things could happen to people like her. She was not that person anymore. At 11:47, she heard the engines. Not a single car. Multiple engines, synchronized and deliberate, the kind of sound that comes from vehicles traveling together with purpose. She sat up straight. Her breath came faster. 3 black SUVs came into view on the highway, headlights cutting through the darkness with the intensity of spotlights, and they were slowing down, they were seeing her car on the shoulder, they were going to stop. The first SUV pulled alongside her, and she watched the window descend with an electric hum, watched the dark interior become visible, watched a man inside shift his massive shoulders toward her. The man was thick-necked and brutal-looking, with scarred knuckles and eyes that had seen violence up close and personal. His name was Bruno, though she didn't know that yet. He was Giovanni Calabrese's first lieutenant, and he carried a gun under his tailored jacket the way other men carried wallets. "You broken down." Bruno's voice was rough, like gravel in a blender, and he wasn't asking out of concern. He was asking because 3 SUVs full of men didn't stop on empty highways to check on people unless there was a reason. This is not a safe road. Nora couldn't speak. Her throat had closed. Every instinct screaming in her body was telling her that this was it, that this was how it ended, that she had made a mistake staying in the car, that she was going to disappear on this empty stretch of highway and Emma would grow up asking where her mother went. The rear SUV pulled ahead. A man emerged from the passenger seat, unfolding himself like something large learning to exist in small spaces. He was tall, 6'3", maybe 4, and he wore a black cashmere coat that cost more than Nora's monthly rent, and he moved with the kind of deliberate precision that comes from men who have learned that every motion matters. His dark hair was swept back from his forehead. His face was carved in sharp lines. He had a scar running from just below his left eye to his jawline, thin and pale and old, like something he'd carried since he was young. When he looked at her through the open window, his eyes were storm grey and they contained depths that had nothing to do with kindness. "Your car is broken," he said, and his voice was deep and solid like an oath, like something you could build a foundation on. "Get in." Nora did not move. She could not move. The man reached into his coat, her heart stopped, and he withdrew a pack of cigarettes, tapped one out, and placed it between his lips without lighting it. The gesture was casual, but there was nothing casual about him. There was nothing casual about the way Bruno was watching her, or the way Gino, the second lieutenant, emerging from the middle SUV, was positioning himself to block the highway exit. "Now," the man said, and there was no cruelty in his voice, which somehow made it worse. It was the voice of someone accustomed to being obeyed, someone whose words shaped reality simply because they had been spoken. "Get in the vehicle." Nora Voss had $78 and nowhere to go, and a daughter sleeping in a shelter bed 3 miles away, and a car that would not start, and a man who had probably hurt women before and would probably hurt her without hesitation if he decided she was worth the effort. She opened the car door. The October wind tore at her jacket like a blade wrapped in ice. She grabbed her backpack, everything she owned was in that backpack, and she stepped away from the only shelter she had, and she walked toward the black SUV with its tinted windows and its hidden interior and its promise of warm heat and its absolute certainty of danger. The man's name was Giovanni Calabrese, and he was watching her with eyes that could see through skin straight into the bone beneath. Like he could read the scars on her back just by looking at the way she moved. Like he had spent his whole life learning to recognize suffering in other people because he carried so much of it inside himself. When she climbed into the SUV and the door closed behind her, she felt the air change. She felt the world shift. She felt herself cross over a threshold that she could never, ever uncross. "What is your name?" he asked as the vehicle pulled back onto the highway. "Nora," she whispered. "Nora Voss." "I am Giovanni Calabrese," he said, and she understood without being told that she had just met someone very powerful, someone very dangerous, someone who would change everything. Behind them, her broken car sat abandoned on the shoulder, and the wind continued to blow through the empty highway, and she sat in the darkness of the SUV with a stranger who smelled like expensive cologne and expensive power, and she had no way of knowing that this decision, accepting this ride, would set off a chain of events that would echo through the rest of her life. The checkered floor of the diner exploded into fragments as the first bullet tore through the window. Glass shattered like ice breaking on a frozen lake, and the sound, sharp, immediate, the crack of a rifle, split the silence at 2:54 in the morning wide open. 3 shots in rapid succession. 3 shots meant for one small boy sitting in a vinyl booth, eating scrambled eggs with his uncle, completely unaware that his existence had just been marked for erasure by a man 15 blocks away who had been paid $20,000 to make him disappear. Nora did not think. She did not calculate the odds or weigh her own survival against a child's. 8 years of running, 8 years of learning to move through the world like a ghost, 8 years of her nervous system trained to recognize danger, all of that collapsed into pure instinct. She launched from her booth. Her body moved like something separate from her mind, like her bones had learned this lesson before her brain could catch up. She covered the boy Marco, though she did not know his name yet, with her entire body as the second volley of bullets shredded the vinyl where his head had been resting less than a second before. His uncle moved faster. Giovanni Calabrese was already moving, already drawing his weapon, already responding with the precision of a man who had spent 22 years learning that hesitation was death. His men emerged from the shadows of the diner like they had been waiting for this moment their entire lives. The sound of return fire filled the restaurant like thunder cracking open a storm. 9 shots. 12. The shooter outside panicked and fled, his footsteps hammering against the parking lot asphalt before an engine roared to life and tires screamed against concrete. The silence that followed dropped like a hammer into sand. Giovanni pulled Nora off his nephew with one hand, checking the boy's body with his eyes, running his palms across Marco's chest and shoulders and neck, searching for blood, for entry wounds, for any sign of the death that had come within inches of claiming him. Marco was shaking so hard his teeth were chattering. Terror had frozen his voice in his throat. But he was alive. Untouched. Breathing. Then Giovanni looked at Nora. She was trembling like a candle in the wind, her eyes wide and glassy with shock, her hands still positioned where they had been shielding the boy's skull. Blood, not hers, not Marco's, someone's from somewhere in the chaos, had sprayed across her borrowed jacket. She had moved without hesitation. She had made herself a shield for a child she had never met, a child connected to a world of violence she could not have understood. Something shifted in Giovanni's chest. Something cold and dangerous and utterly unfamiliar. Bruno appeared at the booth, weapon still drawn, his voice clipped with urgency. "Boss, we need to move now. More could be coming. The second family sent them." This was a statement. "We need to move." Giovanni did not take his eyes off Nora. "You are coming with us," he said. His voice carried the weight of a man accustomed to absolute obedience, to watching people comply with his will the way water flows downhill. Nora shook her head. "I cannot, I have to, I have Emma, I have to get back to." "That shooter saw your face." Giovanni's hand gripped her shoulder. "You just saved my nephew. You are not safe here anymore. Do you understand what I am telling you? You are not safe." She looked into his eyes and saw the truth of it. The truth that her decision to move, to protect, to act had rewritten her geography. Douglas had been hunting her across shelters and parking lots. Now a second predator had her image in his mind. The equation had shifted. She was no longer a woman running from one danger. She was a woman trapped between two. She grabbed her backpack. Everything she owned was in that backpack. She followed Giovanni and his men out of the diner, and the October wind tore at her hair like it was trying to pull her backward, trying to anchor her to the life she was abandoning. A black SUV materialized from the darkness. They moved toward it. The door closed behind her with the sound of a vault ceiling shut. By 3:24 in the morning, exactly 30 minutes after the first bullet pierced the diner window, Nora stood in the marble entryway of Giovanni Calabrese's compound in Los Angeles. The mansion rose 5 stories behind iron gates that were themselves guarded by men in dark suits carrying automatic weapons. Armed men filled every hallway, every corridor, every corner of the house. 30 of them. Maybe more. She had stopped counting at 15. Giovanni had made a single phone call from the SUV. One sentence: "We were hit. Marco is safe. Bring the family home." Now the compound had transformed into a fortress. Soldiers secured every entrance, checked every camera feed, swept every room for tracking devices or hidden threats. Security protocols that had been dormant for months activated with military precision. This was what 30 men looked like when they moved in coordinated response to their leader's voice. This was what power looked like when it mobilized. Nora had never seen anything like it. A woman appeared, gray-haired, warm-faced, moving with the authority of someone who had managed this household for years. "You must be exhausted, dear," the woman said gently. "Come. I will show you upstairs." The guest room was larger than any room Nora had slept in during the last 3 years. Clean sheets. A window overlooking gardens that stretched toward distant city lights. A bathroom with hot water running from the tap like it was free, like water could flow endlessly without calculation. She stood under the shower fully clothed for the first time in months, then slowly peeled off her jacket, her shirt, revealing the map of scars that ran across her back in every direction. 8 years of Douglas Hale. 8 years written in marks that would never fully fade. She washed the diner away. She washed the blood away. She washed 6 years of not crying off her skin. That was all that was left now, all that remained of a woman who had learned to move through the world silent and small. When morning came with sunlight pouring through clean curtains, when the smell of coffee drifted upstairs and she realized she had slept without waking once, reality crashed back like a wave. She found her way to the kitchen where Giovanni sat at a massive table reading the newspaper, his fingers moving across the edge of a coffee cup. Bruno and Gino stood nearby, positioned but not hovering. They looked tired. They had probably been up all night. Giovanni gestured for her to sit. He poured her coffee himself. His men exchanged glances, the kind of glances that meant something had shifted, something unprecedented had occurred. In 15 years, Bruno had never seen Giovanni Calabrese pour coffee for anyone. "You saved my nephew's life," Giovanni said. His voice was steady, measured, like he was stating a fact the way a man states the color of the sky. "I do not forget debts like that." Nora wrapped her hands around the cup. The warmth felt like a memory of safety. "I did not do it for a debt," she said quietly. Anyone would have." "No." Giovanni's eyes found hers. "Not anyone. Most people freeze." "You moved. Why did you move?" She hesitated. Her lips trembled slightly. "I have a daughter. Emma. She is 6 years old. I have not seen her in 8 months because it is not safe for her to be near me. If someone had protected her the way I protected your nephew, if someone had been willing to stand between her and danger without thinking about the cost, I would owe them everything. I would give them everything." Something cracked in Giovanni's expression. Something that had been sealed shut for so long that the breaking of it made him look, for just a moment, like a different person entirely. A person who had felt loss. A person who understood the specific geometry of desperation that comes from loving a child you cannot protect. He had grown up in a neighborhood where his father's fists were the primary language of communication. His mother had tried to shield him until the day she could not. He had been 10 years old when she stopped moving between him and the violence. He had been 12 when he learned that the only way to protect anyone was to become more dangerous than the danger itself. By 22 he had built an empire. By 30 he had eliminated 3 families. By now, he had forgotten what it felt like to be small. But watching Nora hold her daughter's photograph, a worn edge, creases from too much folding, a child with her eyes, he remembered. "Why is it not safe for your daughter?" he asked. "Douglas Hale," she said. "My ex-boyfriend. He has been hunting me for 8 years. Every shelter, every gas station bathroom where I thought I was invisible, every parking lot where I tried to disappear, he finds me. He has a cousin in Lapt. Every report I filed vanished. Every restraining order was ignored. I need $22,000 to disappear properly. New identity, new state, somewhere he cannot find us. I had $99,000 saved. He found that money. I have $78 left. 3 days until he said he will make sure I never run again." The precision of it struck him. She knew the exact number. She had calculated it down to the dollar. That was what desperation looked like, not confusion but absolute clarity about the mathematics of survival. $22,000, Giovanni said. "That is what you need. I cannot ask you for." "You are not asking." His voice dropped lower. "I am telling you. You saved Marco. 22,000 is nothing." Nora felt something break open inside her chest. Something she had been holding closed. "Why would you help me? I am nobody." Giovanni leaned forward, and his men exchanged looks that would be discussed in quiet corners for months afterward. "You are not nobody," he said. "Not anymore. That protection you gave Marco, that was a choice. A conscious choice to make yourself vulnerable for someone else. People like us, people with resources, people with power, we rarely see that. We rarely believe in it." What neither of them knew was that across the city, in an office tower with floor-to-ceiling windows, Victoria Ashford was making her own phone call. She had heard about Giovanni's dramatic exit from the diner with a homeless woman in tow. She had heard the rumors spreading through the society pages of Los Angeles like poison through water. She was 51 years old, elegant in the way that money and spite can make a person elegant, connected to Giovanni's business rivals through her late husband's investments, and she understood power the way a snake understands warmth. She understood that a man could be broken by compassion more thoroughly than by any weapon. Meanwhile, 15 blocks away in a studio apartment that smelled like old cigarettes and older rage, Douglas Hale was tracking a different thread. He had gone to the diner at sunrise. He had questioned the staff. He had seen the black SUVs in the parking lot footage, the men in suits, the way someone's arm had emerged from the vehicle to pull a woman inside. He recognized organized crime when he saw it. His face had gone dark. His hands had started shaking with a rage that needed a target, and the target was the woman who had become his obsession, his project, his unfinished business. 3 blocks away from Giovanni's compound, Douglas sat in a car with binoculars pressed to his eyes, watching guards rotate through their positions, watching the gates open and close, planning his move with the patience of a hunter who had learned that the best traps take time to set. The storm was coming. It had not arrived yet, but the wind was already rising, already carrying the scent of it, already rattling the windows of every building in Los Angeles with the warning that something violent was about to break open across the city like a thunderstorm cracking the sky in two. Rain hammered the windows of Giovanni's compound like fists demanding entry. October in Los Angeles did not bring storms like this. The city had forgotten how to cry, but tonight the sky had split open and the water fell in sheets so heavy it erased the garden beyond the glass. Nora Voss sat on the edge of a bed larger than her old apartment and pressed her trembling hands flat against her thighs so they would stop shaking. The letter lay folded on the nightstand. She had written it by hand because typing felt too deliberate, too final, and handwriting carried the tremor in her fingers like a signature of goodbye. The words were simple. Giovanni, you gave me something I have not had in 8 years, hope that someone could care without hurting. But Douglas will never stop. Victoria is right that I am destroying your reputation. Emma is in danger because of me. I cannot let you pay for my mistakes anymore. She had packed her backpack. Everything she owned still fit inside it. $47 in a worn wallet. A change of clothes. The photograph of her late husband, Michael, the only thing she had saved from the before times when she still believed in permanence. The photo was so creased from handling that his face had begun to fade, like memory itself was erasing him. 2:47 a.m. The rain sounded like static, like white noise, like the sound of the world running backward. She stood. The backpack waited by the door. Her hand found the doorknob. Cold brass under her palm. All she had to do was turn it. Step into the hallway. Find the stairs. Walk out into the rain the way she had walked out 1,000 times before, alone, invisible, taking up no space that mattered. Then she saw Emma's drawing on the dresser. It was a piece of construction paper, kindergarten crude, 2 stick figures holding hands beneath a yellow sun. One figure was tall. One was small. Both were smiling. Emma had drawn it during her last supervised visit, had pressed it into Nora's hands with 5-year-old certainty. For happy times, Mama. To make you smile. Nora had not smiled in 8 years. Not truly. Not in a way that reached her eyes. But looking at that drawing, 2 figures holding hands, together, safe, something cracked open inside her chest. She sat back down on the bed. The backpack remained by the door. Unworn. Unpacked. The letter remained on the nightstand. At 3 in the morning, Giovanni Calabrese could not sleep. He had tried. He had sat in his study with a glass of bourbon that tasted like medicine, had stood on the balcony watching rain destroy his garden, had checked the security feeds for times in 2 hours to confirm Nora was still inside, still safe, still breathing under his roof. His phone had buzzed an hour ago. Douglas Hale had called the main number. Bruno had answered. Douglas's voice had been clear through the speaker, a voice like rust, like violence interrupted mid-swing. Tell her I am coming for her. Tell her she owes me 8 years. Tell her Emma will know what her mother really is. Giovanni had traced the call before Douglas even finished speaking. Cell tower 3 miles away. Motel on Western Avenue. Douglas was in Los Angeles. Close. Hungry. Giovanni's men waited for orders. 12 of them, armed, ready. But Giovanni had not moved. He had just stood there in his study while Bruno watched him, waiting for the command that would end this. End Douglas Hale. End the threat permanently. What stopped him was something he could not name. Something about Nora Voss that made him want to be the kind of man who solved things without blood. The kind of man his mother might have forgiven, had she lived long enough to see what he had become. At 3:17, he left his study. The hallway to her room was dark except for the dim light bleeding under her door. He pushed it open gently. She sat on the bed, shoulders curved inward, staring at something in her hands. Her backpack lay by the door. He saw it before she turned, and understanding arrived like a blade wrapped in ice. She was leaving. He watched her for 3 seconds. 4. 5. Taking in the posture of defeat, the packed bag, the way her hands trembled with the effort of some terrible decision. Then he saw the letter on the nightstand. His name was on the folded paper in handwriting that shook. Giovanni picked it up. He did not ask permission. He unfolded it and read it standing in the doorway while rain continued its assault against the windows, and with each word his jaw clenched tighter, his shoulders went more rigid, his hands began to shake with something that had no proper name. You gave me something I have not had in 8 years. She could not. He would not allow it. No, he said. The word was quiet. It was also absolute. Nora looked up, startled from whatever dark place her thoughts had taken her. When she saw him holding the letter, her face went white. Giovanni, You are not leaving. You don't understand. Douglas is, Victoria was right, I am destroying you, destroying your. You are not leaving, he repeated, and this time the words came out like an oath, like a vow spoken in a language older than Italian, older than anything but raw need. Not tonight. Not ever. He set the letter on her dresser. Then he pulled his phone from his pocket and made a single call. Bruno. Boss. Bruno's voice came through immediately. Alert. Waiting. Douglas Hale. Western Avenue. Kill this. Silence. Not hesitation. Bruno never hesitated. Silence, and then, yes, boss. The call ended. Giovanni looked at Nora. He will not touch you again. He will not breathe on the same street as your daughter again. This is finished. Nora stared at him like she was watching a stranger. Perhaps she was. Perhaps in that moment, Giovanni Calabrese became something she had never seen before, a man willing to dismantle the world to keep one small woman from disappearing into rain and darkness. What did you do? She whispered. What needed to be done? 23 minutes after Bruno received the call, 12 men in black moved through the October rain like ghosts. They had Douglas Hale's location triangulated to the exact room. They entered the motel at 3:47 in the morning through a lock that opened like breath against their intention. Douglas woke to gloved hands dragging him from bed. He was a man who had spent 8 years imagining his violence forward, 8 years planning and stalking and building rage into something solid enough to hold. He was not a man prepared for the moment when violence arrived on him from outside, sudden and absolute. He tried to fight. He made sounds that had no words. Bruno pinned his arms with the efficiency of someone who had done this 1,000 times before, and a voice came down like a hammer. You made a mistake touching what belongs to Giovanni Calabrese. Douglas's eyes went wide. He understood, with the clarity of a man meeting the end of everything he was, that his life had just ended. I have rights, I have connections, my cousin his. Your cousin, Bruno interrupted, pressing Douglas's face against the wet mattress, just got transferred to Alaska. Permanently. By now, he is receiving documentation that will make him very unpopular with the federal government. You have nothing. No one. Douglas was dragged into a van, he screaming, muffled by the rain, by the roar of the engine, by the absolute indifference of the city. They drove him to a warehouse in the industrial sector where Giovanni waited in an empty space, just concrete and water dripping from broken skylights and fluorescent lights that hummed like insects. Douglas Hale, wet and shaking, looked at the man he had hunted through dark internet searches and corrupt cop contacts. Giovanni Calabrese looked back at him with the kind of cold that comes from knowing exactly how small a human being could be. "You hunted Nora Voss for 8 years, Giovanni said." His voice was not loud. It did not need to be. "You put your hands on her. You threatened her child. I could kill you." Douglas started speaking, words tumbling out like water. "I didn't mean, she belongs to me, I love her, I just need her to understand." "Too quick," Giovanni continued as if Douglas had not spoken. "Death would be too quick. Too easy. Too merciful, and you do not deserve mercy." Douglas's face fell. Understanding arrived like a curse. Instead, Giovanni said, "You are being given to the Beretta family. My rivals. The ones who attempted to kill my nephew last month. They have been looking for someone to blame for certain unfortunate shipment problems in their distribution network. Congratulations, Douglas. You just became their scapegoat. They will make a very interesting example of you. I suspect you will spend quite a long time wishing I had simply killed you instead." Douglas began screaming. He screamed as Bruno and Gino dragged him to another van. He screamed as they drove him to a dock where other men waited, men whose faces bore the scars of the Beretta organization. He screamed until his voice broke and became something barely human. By 4 in the morning, Douglas Hale had disappeared into the Beretta family's custody. His cousin, at the Lapt, received a package at his apartment containing photographs of Douglas collaborating with organized crime, documentation of bribes, evidence so thorough and damaging that federal investigators would have him under arrest before his shift ended. His career would be erased. His freedom would follow within months. Giovanni handled Victoria Ashford differently. She arrived at the compound the next morning in a cream-colored Mercedes, dressed in Chanel that cost more than Nora's entire life history, her face arranged in the expression of someone accustomed to getting exactly what she wanted because the world had been built by people like her, for people like her. Giovanni did not see her. He did not need to. He made 7 phone calls over the course of 12 hours. The first call went to every charity board that had Victoria's name on its letterhead. Her volunteers began receiving notices of investigation from the IRS. The second call went to the FBI. An anonymous tip arrived with documentation about financial irregularities in Victoria Ashford's late husband's estate. Embezzlement. Fraud. Victoria's signature on documents that she had hoped the years and her husband's death had buried. The third call went to her business partners. Quietly. Just a mention of the investigation. That was enough. By evening, she was being removed from 3 boards. By the end of the second day, Victoria Ashford was arrested at dawn while attending a garden party, agents arriving with handcuffs and cameras that flashed in her face. 40 years. Wire fraud. Tax evasion. Asset forfeiture. Everything she had built, dismantled. Everything she was, erased. As she was pushed into the FBI vehicle, she saw Giovanni Calabrese watching from across the street. His expression said nothing. It said everything. Both villains destroyed. Not killed. Erased. Systematically, completely, in ways that would follow them forever. At the compound, Nora Voss looked at the photograph on her dresser. Not the one of her dead husband. The letter. The one Giovanni had read. He had not destroyed it. He had simply placed it back where he found it, a choice so tender it broke something in her chest that had been broken before and had never healed. The rain began to soften. By morning, it would stop completely. The storm would pass. The storm will pass and you are far stronger than you think. The letter sat on Giovanni Calabrese's mahogany desk at 3 in the morning, her handwriting trembling across the page like a confession written in the dark. Nora Voss had written it in his guest bedroom, her hand shaking so badly she could barely hold the pen, knowing this was the only way to protect him. The words were simple and devastating. I love you. I cannot stay. If I disappear, Douglas cannot hurt you. If I disappear, you live. She had planned to leave before dawn, slipping out like she had slipped out of every shelter, every safe house, every temporary home for 8 years. But Giovanni had found the letter before she could vanish. The rain hammered against the floor-to-ceiling windows of the study, each drop sounding like a small accusation. He sat in his leather chair, the letter in his hands, reading it again for the 3rd time. His face revealed nothing. A man who had clawed his way out of the South Side at 17, who had built an empire on codes and violence and absolute control, was reading a goodbye letter from a woman he had known for only 2 weeks. He picked up his phone. Within 30 minutes, 30 men moved through the October darkness in black SUVs with tinted windows. They did not speak. They had learned long ago that Giovanni's silence was more dangerous than any shouted command. They went to every shelter Nora had lived in. Every gas station bathroom where she had washed her face in the mirror and pretended she was not disappearing. Every cheap motel where she had locked the door and listened to Douglas's voice outside, begging, threatening, swearing he would find her again. And then they found Douglas Hale. He was in a basement apartment in Van Nuys, photographs of Nora covering every wall. 8 years of stalking documented in color. She was sleeping. She was eating. She was walking to work. She was holding a child who was not his but whom he had convinced himself he would one day claim. The men entered without breaking down the door. Douglas Hale opened his eyes to find 6 of them standing around his bed, their suits more expensive than everything he owned, their expressions empty of mercy. He screamed. He fought. He begged them to tell him who sent them. None of them answered. They moved him silently through the night like pallbearers carrying something already dead. Back at the compound, Nora woke to the sound of silence. The rain had stopped. The wind had died. The world had gone perfectly still. She lay in the guest bedroom with its white linens and windows that overlooked the city, and she realized that something had changed while she slept. The constant vigilance, the animal alertness that had kept her alive for 8 years, had released its grip. She no longer felt hunted. Giovanni was waiting in the study. He stood when she entered, and she saw that he had not slept. His dark eyes were lined, his jaw tight, and in his hand he held her letter. "It is finished," he said. The words did not land at first. She stared at him, waiting for the next part. The part where he explained. The part where there was still danger. Douglas Hale is gone. Victoria Ashford is in federal custody as of 6 this morning. Wire fraud. Tax evasion. Asset forfeiture. She will spend 40 years in prison. He set the letter down on the desk. You do not run from him anymore, Nora. You will never run from him again. On the desk beside the letter lay stacks of cash. $22,000, banded in hundreds, organized with military precision. The number that had haunted her for 3 days. The amount she needed to disappear. That is still yours, Giovanni said quietly. New identity. New start. You and Emma. Anywhere you want to go. I keep my promises. She stared at the money. A week ago it had represented impossible salvation. A ticket out of the darkness. Now it looked like running again. It looked like the 8 years repeating themselves. A new city. A new shelter. A new whispered prayer that Douglas would not find her this time. Emma would sleep with one ear open, listening for footsteps. Emma would learn that safety was temporary, that love was a trap, that staying in one place long enough meant destruction. What if I do not want to disappear? Nora's voice was barely a whisper. Giovanni did not move. Then you stay. Just like that. You rebuild. You let Emma come home. You stop running. His voice was deep and solid like an oath. You start believing that you deserve to stay. She sat down slowly in the chair across from his desk, her legs suddenly unable to hold her weight. The grief came without warning. Not the sharp grief of fresh loss, but the bone-deep exhaustion of someone who had been carrying too much for too long. Why do you care what happens to me? The question escaped before she could stop it. I am nobody. I sleep in cars. I have scars and a record of restraining orders that went nowhere. You are the woman who threw herself in front of my nephew during a shooting without thinking of consequences. Without thinking of what it would cost you. He moved around the desk and leaned against it, his shadow stretching across the floor. You have survived 8 years of hell and you are still standing. You remind me why I clawed out of that childhood, so people like you would not have to face people like Douglas alone. She thought of the checkered floor of the diner. The moment the shooting started. Emma's scream. The way her body had moved before her mind caught up, an instinct older than fear. She had shielded his nephew without thinking because no child deserved to die in a bathroom smelling of stale coffee and terror. That small act of defiance had changed everything. I am scared, she said. Good. Giovanni's expression did not soften, but something shifted behind his eyes. Fear means you understand what you are choosing. Fear means you are not broken. She walked through the compound alone after that, moving through rooms of marble and mahogany, past men in suits who watched her with the careful attention of people who had been instructed to protect her. She found herself in the library, where a photo sat on the shelf. Her late husband, Marcus. Dead for 6 years, taken by illness before Douglas had ever found her. Before she had started running. She picked up the frame and held it against her chest. Emma's drawing was in her pocket. A picture of a house with 3 people standing in front of it. Nora. Emma. And a man with dark hair that Emma had drawn in black marker with a kind of certainty, as if she had always known he would be there. The child had drawn a future that Nora had been too afraid to imagine. On the terrace, Giovanni stood alone watching the city. The sun was beginning to rise over Los Angeles, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. She moved toward him, and he turned slightly, acknowledging her presence without words. I want to stay, Nora said. Not because I need protection. Because I choose to stop running. Then you stay. He said it like a vow. Like a promise that could not be broken. Like the beginning of something neither of them had dared to name yet. They stood side by side as the city woke. 2 people shaped by violence. 2 people who understood that survival required a kind of hardness that love could soften but never eliminate. 2 people who had chosen, in that moment, to believe in tomorrow. 3 months later, Nora had an apartment of her own 4 blocks from the compound. It was small and clean and decorated with things she had chosen herself. The rent was paid by Giovanni, but the lease was in her name. Independence with support. Emma attended a private school with security that seemed invisible but was always there. She had stopped flinching at sudden movements. She had stopped sleeping with her shoes on. Nora worked in Giovanni's legitimate business, learning accounting, rebuilding a resume that Douglas Hale's stalking had destroyed. The scars on her back remained, but she no longer wore shirts that covered them. They were a map of survival, not shame. The late-night diner with the checkered floor had become their ritual. Once a month, Nora and Giovanni would sit in the same booth where the shooting had happened. The bullet holes were still visible in the vinyl, patched but not erased. They drank stale coffee and did not speak much. Words were unnecessary. On a Tuesday night, Emma performed in her school play. Nora sat in the audience surrounded by other parents, no longer looking over her shoulder. Emma spotted her from the stage and waved, and Nora waved back through tears. Not tears of pain. Tears of the overwhelming proof that survival was worth it. The storm had passed. The October wind that had threatened to tear her apart was gone. In its place was something fragile and new, something Nora was learning to call home. And for the first time in 8 years, she believed it might stay. If this story touched your heart, please subscribe to the channel, like and share this video with the people you love. Every comment you leave is a precious source of motivation. We wish all of you good health, a joyful life, and days filled with peace.